And so the disparities of income and wealth, power and powerlessness were always sort of always apparent to my eye, always right in front of me. And it has always informed my scholarship, my teaching, and my research. You look one way and you see enormous wealth and power. And you look the other way and you see people struggling under high stress families. And that contrast, there are scholars who do one thing only, and there are scholars who get curious. I'm curious. I would just like to take a new puzzle and turn it over and see what I can do with it. But the bottom line for almost everything I do has to do with democratic empowerment. What I want to know is, how do we construct a society of inclusion and fairness and approximately equal power? And how do we make everyone feel that they belong to a society and contribute to it? American founders were very ambivalent about democracy. So the big question for sort of 21st century America is a constitutional system established over 200 years ago, when the United States was a small little country at the edge of the planet that no one paid much attention to, can we still operate with those institutions in a 21st century superpower? And that's a dilemma that I think about, I write about, and I want my students to encounter all the time. The American story of democracy is a story of contradiction. On the one hand, we celebrate inclusiveness and participation and think of ourselves as a world-leading democracy. On the other hand, there are barriers to participation that have always existed, still exist, and the United States does not rank among the top 10 or 15 countries in the world as most democratic. Our strength is our sense of individualism, a sense of individual empowerment, that people actually believe they can make a difference. Oh, want to do that again?
You can say that people actually believe they can make a difference.
Yeah, people actually believe they can make a difference. The weakness is that mantra gets in the way of careful analysis of exactly who does have power in America, what are the limits of the American democratic experience, who is not included, and where clear differences in power exist. There's increasing research that the American political system does not respond to either the interests or demands of average citizens. And so the sense of individual empowerment sits very badly with the limits of democratic engagement that is prevalent in our society. Inequality undermines the equal inclusion of every single citizen. Both economic inequality, where people feel they're above or below the society, and political inequality, where people's voices are not heard. And it distorts the outcomes that we find in the public policies of our society.
Resilience.
I think we should be concerned. Someone once said American democracy is an invitation to struggle. But with so much fragmentation and so much division, we are not necessarily getting policy. The inherent dilemma of contemporary American politics is we have so many veto players who are so antagonistic to each other that we aren't getting anything done. One can interpret democracy as the rule of the majority opinion. That was never the founders' intention. They wanted consideration of majority opinion. And in a small, fragmented, relatively unimportant country, that was reasonable. The question is, can we live today with that kind of fragmentation? That's a dilemma. That's inherent to the American story every day. So I went to Romania in 1995, a couple of years after the revolution. I was there on a Fulbright to teach research methods to the first graduating class in political science in the country. The Romanian Revolution was 80% coup d'etat and 20% revolution. So they had very little understanding of what they were doing and very little inclination to be democratic. It was not a bottom-up democratic revolution. And very quickly, the heads of the revolution established themselves as the government party and dominated the electoral and policy-making apparatus with substantial amounts of corruption for quite a while. Democratic pressures came slowly. There was massive optimism, but relatively naive. I had a student once say to me, "We're democratic now, therefore I don't have to come to class," on the assumption that if that one became a model, then other curriculum would follow. And we brought senior faculty to the US, we paid people to write syllabi, we sent young American scholars to co-teach, we ran conferences, we subsidized research, did everything possible to produce incentives for a modern political science department. And I went back and forth, and I was heavily involved in writing the curriculum and advising. It was a wonderful experience. The new leadership in this faculty are friends of mine, co-authors of mine, and I go back quite often to teach and do research and just see friends. San Diego State prides itself on the engaged teacher-scholar model. And we don't quite understand just how radical that is for those who have experienced a more traditional education. The idea of presenting dilemmas to students, the idea of presenting dilemmas to students, understanding that most issues are essentially contested and that people of good morals will disagree. And the object is to think through multiple sides and to debate them openly. That's not how traditional classrooms were constructed either in the US and certainly not in Eastern Europe. And the idea of transforming the way research happened, more rigorous research, and transforming classroom experiences, that was a fundamental ground shift in how education occurred. And it's progressing, not miraculously, but each year I notice important improvements in the faculty.
Like creating those building blocks?
Oh, it was a battle because political science in Romania was heavily communist studies. That when new curriculum, new faculties were created, sometimes the old dinosaurs were assigned to them. That there was not a body of young, intelligent, well-trained scholars. And that all had to be created from the ground up. I had always, I had been educated and was taught and taught myself in the elite private universities. But when it was time to administer, I wanted to be at SDSU. SDSU is, you can describe it as upwardly mobile university in a world where upward mobility is declining. Complex, public, with a clear mission to serve the students of the community and to help foster democratic engagement and political participation and civic pride in a group of people who are the American future. It's not a matter of problem solving. This isn't an engineering problem. This is, these are fundamental issues that people will fight over. The object of a political science class, at least to me, is to present fundamental moral dilemmas to students, to give them a taste of the arguments on multiple sides, and challenge them to start to construct positions of their own. I think my role as a political science professor is to present fundamental moral dilemmas and put them in front of students, to force students to engage in these fundamental moral dilemmas, to let them understand the various positions that they might adopt, and then to push them to adopt positions in a preliminary way of their own. And that is the key to democratic education. As far as I'm concerned, we are training the next generation of engaged democratic citizens. SDSU is in an interesting contradictory position. It is a university that prides itself on upward mobility, both economically and in terms of political and social engagement. We have large numbers of students who are the first one in their families to go to university. We are heavily ethnically diverse, and that we have a special role in the American society to promote inclusion and participation. On the other hand, American society is less open. We are no longer the land of opportunity. There are countries that have far greater levels of social mobility than we have. We are massively unequal. Our political system is less and less responding to the voices of average individuals. And so whereas SDSU has this fundamental role of democratic engagement, we live in a society where that democratic engagement is declining. Yeah, I want the students to have a sense that they belong to this university, that they belong to the community, they belong to the society, and that they have both the skills and the questions to become engaged democratic citizens. So I first went to Romania in 1995, just a few years after the revolution. I was there on a Fulbright to teach research methods, the first graduating class in political science in the country. Political science before that had been communist studies. And I then continued my engagement as the senior consultant to a program to help build political science across Romanian universities. There was very little sense of academic research, especially in the social sciences. It had been a dead field under the communists. And so the object was to train junior scholars, to get them the skills, to get them connected to the wider academic universe, and to produce young academics who taught well and could publish at a seriously high level. I mean, in many ways it parallels my role here. When I came to SDSU, this was a very young department. I came as chair of a department where most of the scholars were young. And the object was to just mentor them, and they are now all tenured, promoted, publishing beautifully. And it was just a matter of helping to guide them onto the road of successful careers.